Hey, this is Blondeguygamer, and welcome to another part of my North American Tales of Retrospective. And it's here we get to talk about a very significant entry, Tales of Symphonia. But first, I do want to give a quick update on the rules just to clarify something. If you haven't noticed in the new intro, I decided to do this retrospective up until Cesteria, since it's most likely going to be the last Tales game available for the PlayStation 3 over here. I did say I might end the retrospective there, so I'm just confirming it now. Besides, at the rate I'm going, I wouldn't be able to catch up with upcoming releases like Symphonia anytime soon. Okay, this is a big one, as it's the first Tales game I played along with many others. Because of that, it's often regarded as a fan favorite, arguably being the most known game in the series. And I won't be surprised if there are people that watch this part first, since the PlayStation Tales games we got were really overlooked, and I'm pretty sure they probably wouldn't even know those existed. We are certainly going to go over how much of an impact it has made, but this is still over 10 years old since its original release. So does it hold up to warrant the popularity? Short answer, yes. Long answer is this entire video. So let's get to it. Tales of Symphonia came out in North America on July 13th, 2004 for the Nintendo GameCube, nearly 11 months after the Japanese release. It should also be noted that this is the first Tales game to be released in Europe. Namco is naturally still the publisher, but the developers of the previous entries, Wolf Team, who also made the 2002 PlayStation 2 sequel of the Tales of Destiny we never got, were renamed into Namco Tales Studio. However, the studio around this time were actually two teams. Team Destiny that worked on Destiny 2 and would make Tales Rebirth, and Team Symphonia for this game consisting of developers from Tales of Eternia. Also staying true is the quality of the animated intro and cutscenes from Production IG. And while we once again have an orchestrated piece of music replacing a J-pop style song, which was Starry Heavens by Day After Tomorrow, I actually kinda prefer this version. Admittedly, it could be nostalgic bias since I did play this when it came out, but the music here conveys a sense of grand adventure, and it's definitely more memorable than the pieces we got for Destiny's and Eternia's openings. I know the Japanese opening music fits more in an anime sense, but the North American version fits in an RPG sense, so there isn't really a wrong choice and just personal preference in my opinion. Our game begins with narration about a giant life-giving mana tree that withered in an ancient war, the hero of said war, and the goddess Mortel that wishes to be awakened. We then cut to our protagonist Lloyd Irving doing what he does best in school as he, his teacher, and classmates give us more exposition about the world of Sevron through a history lesson. Today just so happens to be the day of prophecy where the Chosen, Colette Brunel, begins her journey of regeneration to restore the world's mana and wipe out the Desians, a group of half-elves wreaking havoc by enslaving humans in their ranch facilities. This process of regeneration requires Colette and our party to travel to temples and release her seals in order for her to gain angelic powers, then enter the Tower of Salvation to save the world. It's kinda like Yuna's pilgrimage in Final Fantasy X, only the story and characters are better. Should've saw that coming. Alright, there is more than just that as the game goes on, but the only other things I'll say is that he eventually traveled to another world, Tethiala, and formed pacts with the summon spirits of both like in Tales of Eternia, which is not surprising since this is primarily the same team and a good amount of other mechanics from Eternia are brought over, though new things are introduced and there are a lot of them. First thing you'll notice is that this is the first fully 3D Tales of game. As such, the movement in towns and dungeons is much smoother than the top-down and isometric views of old. With the field maps, they're relatively fine as well, though the camera angle they chose is a little low and can make it hard to ascertain what you can walk through at times. By finding guideposts, you'll have the ability to ride Noish, Lloyd's dog-like companion, in the general areas of found posts. This zooms out the camera and lets you traverse faster while making it easier to avoid enemy encounters. Later on in Tethiala, you get to use an elemental cargo boat for a while to get to places via docks, but it's no Vayne Altea from Eternia and doesn't really control all that well to be honest. But that and Noish are quickly abandoned once you get control of the Riards, allowing flight in both worlds. Which makes me question why some guideposts are only accessible with the Riards when you can just use those all the time at that point anyway. What remains consistent is the battle system, now the multi-line linear motion battle system. Fights take place in 3D areas, but characters move in lines towards their target opponent. As such, movement is still 2D in that sense, with switching targets being the only way to change the axis direction. Because of that, there is no form of free movement yet, so care is needed not to get stuck behind an enemy on the edge of the arenas, but the vice versa can be done as well. Basic attack combos followed by techniques are still present, as well as shortcutting to commands like in Eternia. Only this time, Symphonia has more emphasis on defense, as you can evade by pressing away while blocking, and early in the game you learn guarding techs, which by pressing down while guarding you'll protect yourself better from more powerful spell attacks at the expense of some TP. Shortly after learning that, you also get unison attacks, which by filling the gates, you can unleash an attack where all 4 party members use corresponding techs assigned to each face button. And if 2 of certain techs are used, a compound special attack is initiated. It's kinda like the dual techs in Chrono Trigger, only more circumstantial here. It still encourages some experimenting as they can dish out some good damage. What's also worth experimenting with is the usual assigning of individual strategies strategies, party formation, and using orders during battles with the D-pad, which are preset strategies that can be customized and even named. And speaking of customization, most advanced text characters learn are now in 2 paths, Technical and Strike, and are determined by which of the 2 the character is on. In order to be on either path, skills from EX gems that are found throughout the game need to be set. These by themselves give various bonuses and come in 4 levels, with each character having 4 available slots. But depending on what more of the type of skills are chosen, the character will lean towards the S or T path. Once the character is high level enough and does the previous tier of tech move 50 times, the next level technique will be learned and is determined by the type alignment. Getting back to the EX gems, compound EX skills can also be learned by having the right combination of skills and unlocking them after a battle. These provide various bonuses and effects, some of which are unique for each character. Though you still need to keep your alignments in mind when setting skills for these, as characters can eventually shift over to the other type. If that happens, then you'll need to forget skills of the previous path in order to learn those tiers of text for the other. Also new for Symphonia are over limits, where once enough damage is done to characters, they enter this state for a short time in which they can't get staggered and take less damage. It's also the only way for the summoner character to cast spells for the summon spirits. But keep in mind that bosses can enter over limits as well, so watch out when that happens. Tales of Symphonia's combat keeps the fast-paced nature from Eternia while being more engaging with the new intricacies. The view also adjusts and shifts around as the battles go on, giving them a dynamic feel that very rarely gives you a bad angle. Well, unless you play multiplayer, which, while certainly easy to set up, still has the problem that the camera mostly focuses on the first player. It's still there if you have a friend or 2 or even 3 to play the game with. Exploring, shopping, and towns are still here, of course, even with the ever-mysterious Wonder Chef returning his out-of-place things to find and learn recipes for the cooking system, which remains a helpful recovery option that you can now set characters to cook dishes after each battle with a button prompt. Buying new weapons and armors are still prevalent, but we now have customization options, where with old equipment and materials dropped from monsters or found elsewhere, you can make new equipment and save some gold. So it's in your best interest not to sell all your old stuff in that regard. There's also the cat teams that can help you in telling you what you missed in terms of things like locations or items. I never really used these guys, but you can if you want. Also, cat people is not something new for this entry in the series, believe it or not. With dungeons, one thing that's made apparent right away is that all enemy encounters are visible and no longer random like in older RPGs, though the nature of fights beyond your control can still happen to a degree when traveling the world maps on foot. The Sorcerer's Ring makes a return as it's obtained pretty much at the beginning of the game and is used all throughout numerous locations. But what makes it extremely versatile is that the function of the rings changes in dungeons that have a terminal, having you tackle each place in specific ways. Plus, by default the ring can even briefly stun enemies if you want to better avoid encounters. If you are thorough, on the other hand, you can find memory gems from certain fights, which are used to unlock a memory circle save point in each dungeon that has one. Other than that though, the saving returns to the standard save points in towns and dungeons and saving anywhere on the world maps. A nice return to convention rather than the somewhat unorthodox saving and continuing methods from Tales of Eternia. Another staple that returns is our good old friend block pushing. However, these are much better than trying to move things around in Eternia, but it is still a pretty cliche video game mechanic, especially since block pushing puzzles are used quite a bit in Symphonia. These parts do drag a little, but they mix them up a bit, and I find that the Sorcering's functions and the general level design helps balance things out. Temples and areas early in the game start out pretty small and simple, getting a little more complex later on, but not too big just for the sake of an RPG dungeon. They feel just right for not being too maze-like while still presenting a good amount of challenges. Some are more fickle than others, but the only place that really annoyed me was the Shao Temple, as you need to gather parts of a summoned spirit to a spot, and it's like trying to herd a group of 5-year-olds on a sugar rush. In this journey we get 9 party members, which tied with Tales of Destiny has the most playable characters in the main entry that I am aware of. That, and we now have up to 8 member slots to organize the group from. Our protagonist Lloyd fights with dual swords and has unique stats of slash and thrust attack power, which are dependent on the type of tech used in battles. He isn't exactly the brightest bulb, and the narrative makes that very clear, but what he lacks in book smarts and attention span, Lloyd makes it up by being a pretty competent strategist and an idealist wanting to find a solution to save both worlds. And despite the fact the main reason he chose to fight with 2 swords is because he thought it would be double the power of 1 sword, yes, really, Lloyd is a very capable main character fighter, dishing out flurries of sword strikes for high combo potential. Colette, the aforementioned Chosen of Severon, uses chakras for immune attacks with power hammer and item theft tech moves. The angelic powers Colette gains range from powerful light magical attacks to buffing the party's attack and defense briefly, but take a while to cast and use quite a bit of TP. Colette is the innocent, cheerful anime girl trope, complete with being clumsy that usually works in the party's favor. Hell, tripping into enemies is how she steals items by accident. However, Colette isn't an airhead as she takes her role as a Chosen very seriously, willing to do what it takes to achieve her goal while trying not to let her friends worry, which does make her a martyr, so be prepared for that. Genius Sage, a young classmate and friend of Lloyd and Colette, is a mage that primarily casts offensive magic at foes. He can attack with a kendama, which is about as effective as any physical attack from a mage would be, so he's best to hang back and cast spells from a distance. Not only is Genius gifted with magic, but in academics as well, making him one of the most intelligent members in case the name Genius isn't a giveaway, or that his Japanese name was actually Genius, though he is still a kid and acts as such now and then. Kratos Orion is a mercenary that gets hired to protect Colette, who uses a sword and shield but can also use low-level healing and offensive magic, making him a versatile magic knight of sorts. Kratos is a stern and commanding fellow, especially towards Lloyd, but is willing to go along with the wishes of the Chosen and her group in their journey. Genis' older sister and classroom teacher Rain is the healer of the group, with support spells in addition to light magic to give her some offensive capabilities since her staff won't do much. And if you thought Genis' Japanese name of Genius was too on the nose, Rain's original name was Refill, which sounds more like a soda machine than a healer. Being aptly nicknamed as a professor, she is logical and to the point, but still cares deeply for her companions even if her remarks seem blunt. And because she has a keen interest in runes and history, Rain will often go a little nuts over them. Kinda reminds me of how fanatical people can get over games and things, says the guy intricately covering Tales of games. Then there's Shina Fujibayashi, I hope I said that last name well enough, an assassin that at first attacks the party but eventually warms up and joins them. Shina is certainly a popular female Tales character, since she does have some nice abilities. Her primary offense is using magic-infused cards that can inflict various effects, like knocking enemies away or draining a small portion of HP or TP. Shina is also this game's summoner, forming pacts with all the spirits and can call them into battle, but only when she gets overlimited, like I said earlier. Shina can be a bit hot-headed, but is a strong-willed and invaluable member, and the fact she's a ninja summoner is pretty badass. Zelos is another magical knight, sharing the fighting style of Kratos. He is Tetheala's chosen, but is way more carefree about it than Colette, and is a celebrity of sorts because of his status. He also has a thing for the ladies, which is made apparent right away from the get-go when you meet him. Zelos is actually so much of a womanizer that his personal EX skill is getting money and items by talking to female NPCs as the on-screen character, which is a very easy thing to exploit. Despite his behavior that would piss off certain people on social media these days, Zelos is actually a pretty complex character, so there is more to him than just being a comic relief. Presea Combator is a 12-year-old lumberjack girl and is actually one of the strongest physical attackers with an axe. Trust me, this isn't even the most ridiculous character in the series yet. When you first get her, Presea is a little off-putting as her speech and behavior is very robotic. She does eventually act more normal, but still retains some stoic mannerisms. Lastly, we have Regal, a convict that uses foot grease to attack with numerous kick moves. Despite being a criminal, Regal is surprisingly refined and knowledgeable, though he bears a heavy burden for what he did. So much so that his default facial expression is a frown that would give Kratos' Permaskull a run for his money. And when I say Kratos, I mean God of War Kratos, not this game's Kratos. In other words, the one you stop being sympathetic towards after he gets betrayed by the gods and kills them for the millionth time. Ugh, pissing off Final Fantasy X and God of War fans. Aren't I on a roll? In all seriousness, I do like the diversity of these characters as they are all capable fighters with good developments. One aspect of the characters we finally get in full fruition are the additional conversations, now as skits. By pressing the Z button when prompts show up, you'll get a scene with character portraits talking about whatever is brought up in the skit titles. These give some good insight on the worlds, the characters, or are just there for amusing or heartwarming set pieces. The only problem is that none of them have voice acting, while all the skits in the original Japanese version were fully voiced. Though it's a minor complaint as I'm glad we still got these kinds of conversations at all, considering they were cut out in Destiny and Eternia. Better late than never for us with the series, I say. Skits can come up in towns, dungeons, and the world maps, of which you can also find special skits between Lloyd and another character that gives you a choice for Lloyd to respond with. If you choose a good reply, the relationship values between Lloyd and that character will go up. In addition to those special skits, decisions you make in the adventure can raise or even lower values between all the characters. The main thing that comes from this is that a few scenes with Lloyd will be with the character you have the highest affection value. By default, Colette is the highest, so if you try to appeal to everyone, chances are Colette will still be your choice regardless. You can have any other party member in that position, but you do need to go a little out of the way to manipulate the relationships and primarily focus on raising the specific character you want. Still, this system does encourage some replayability to see how some scenes are played out with different characters, and is well thought out. The only other RPG I know of that does something like this is Skies of Arcadia, only that was for the swashbuckler rating that affected Vice's reputation in that world. The base story and narrative still has the quality that's usually associated with Tales of games, as Symphonia delves into themes of discrimination, particularly of half-elves, sacrifice, guilt, and the right to live are among the moral discussions that are brought up. That doesn't mean there aren't any quirks you might expect in JRPGs though. Remember how in Tales of Eternia characters will often spout the same phrase over and over? Well, Symphonia does have that to a lesser extent, such as Lloyd going, "What's that supposed to mean?" or Sheena's, "You gotta be kidding me!" But Symphonia has something else that is way more prevalent, so much so that I'm gonna rework the Tales of Eternia catchphrase drinking game from the last part into a new segment for the retrospective. And now, it's time for this entry's edition of the Tales of Drinking Game! For Tales of Symphonia, take a shot every time someone says sorry or apologizes, followed by another if the person receiving the apologizes says they don't need it. With just Colette alone, I can guarantee you'll get wasted pretty quickly. I've said this to friends that profusely apologize out of habit, and I'll say it here for Tales of Symphonia. When a Canadian is telling you you're saying sorry too much, then you really are apologizing too much. There's also a lot of obvious foreshadowing, but I think the overall story is still engaging enough to keep you going with good plot twists and revelations. It certainly kept me going for about 60 hours, though a good chunk of that was going for side activities. Tales of Symphonia does have its fair share of minigames, but the amount is thankfully toned down a little after Eternia, as the game goes for more optional events that you can partake. Like in Tales of Eternia, you can earn titles from some of these side quests and general story regression, but they are much more useful here in Symphonia. Titles can now give characters additional stat bonuses with their level ups, giving you a better incentive to get them. You can also now attain titles by meeting prerequisites, such as doing something specific in a battle, or having Colette name every dog in the game. Yeah, that's an actual title for her. Also new for titles in Symphonia are alternate costumes, which don't give you any stat increases, but are at least fun to get. However, the main issue of trying to get all the titles is back with a vengeance. There are some that are a real pain in the ass to get that I still haven't gotten, like not using gel items until a boss fight around halfway through the game. Not only that, but there's also a collector's book for all the different items and equipment you've collected, enemies you scan with magic lenses for data in a monster list, and a figurine collection you can make by processing pellets. Even with a strategy guide, I still haven't 100% this game, but I am curious to see how many figurines I would have to make. Okay, even I don't have the patience to do that right now, and all you get is a title for completing that anyway. Completing lists aside, the amount of content in general is still plentiful as ever, not to mention nods to other Namco games you may or may not expect. Guest characters from previous Tales games you can fight in the Coliseum also make a comeback. In Symphonia, you fight Gar from Destiny and Farah Merity from Eternia 3-on-3 after beating the advanced party fights. Oh, and even Quickie is there too. This can be one of the harder fights to do, if only because it's something I didn't know at first. You can actually use items during this fight, but I didn't know you could because with all the other fights in the arena you can't use items, so that threw me off the first few times I tried. But once I did find that out later, it was more manageable, even if the guest characters can revive each other with life bottles of their own. While it's always a treat to see previous Tales characters cameo, my personal favorite reference is when Persea is given a costume to be a company mascot, which just so happens to be Klonoa. I just find it funny seeing Persea be completely deadpan while in Klonoa character. I can just imagine being like, wahoo, which makes me wish scenes like this had voice acting. Of course, I can't knock the voice work that was done in Tales of Symphonia, as it's a big step up from Tales of Eternia, with experienced voice actors and actresses that give solid performances you may have heard in other games and TV shows. Among them are Scott Menville as Lloyd, and if you're wondering why he sounds like Robin from the Teen Titans cartoons, that is indeed the same voice actor. There's also Cam Clark as Kratos, Jennifer Hale as Sheena, Tara Strong as Persea, Crispin Freeman as Regal, Robin Atkindow as James Arnold Taylor, and Kim I Guess as support characters. I could make the video way longer if I went into every voice role and what everyone has done, but all you need to know is that genuine effort went into the casting for Tales of Symphonia. Granted, you could argue the acting is a little dated compared to today's standards, and the lack of voice skits for us seem limited, probably because of budget restraints, but considering the game still has a pretty substantial amount of voice acted scenes, they did have their work cut out for them. Plus, in battles, characters will now make comments on different situations, such as pointing out an enemy is casting a spell or when they discover weaknesses, integrating voice clips with the game design in a smart way. Speaking of audio, the music from Motoi Sakuruba and Shichi Tomura, now with additional help from sound engineer Takashi Arai, is still good too. Symphonia's soundtrack introduces even more variation, as it goes from more traditional angelic tones to intense electric guitar pieces. I enjoyed the music quite a bit, as it definitely brought back some memories hearing it again. The only criticism I could give is that the Spirit Temples use the same track. Even with a variation to Theala's temples, it's still a little repetitive. It's not bad, it's just that I liked it better when each temple had their own theme back in Tales of Eternia. Other than that, it's another fine addition to the series' soundtracks. Along with the sound, the visual design is another step up in quality. The cel-shaded graphics hold up well, giving Tales of Symphonia vibrant and detailed results. For being the first full 3D entry, the transition went really well, and I found the game still looks pretty good and runs at a smooth 60 frames per second. But like the voice acting, the age is there, particularly with the often looping talking animations and other movements looking a little stiff these days. That, and there were a few instances where the game slowed down during battles, usually because of large spells and enemies, but only a few. The artwork more than makes up for any shortcomings, as Tales of Symphonia actually has a different character designer for their team. Manga artist Kazuki Fujishima, who beforehand worked on Tales of Fantasia. The designs here are a little chibi-fied, but still at proportions similar to Eternia's, and are more expressive thanks to the 3D models, even if some emotions are still shown through thought balloons, while others just have changing face stills, but it's a step in the right direction in advancements for the sprite-based characters. All in all, I had a good time revisiting Tales of Symphonia for the retrospective, and from the perspective of the next entry after Eternia, it continues a trend of keeping the core qualities while improving them and adding new features. I even did some things I didn't do before, which added to my game time, but I don't regret it. Depending on how much of the game you want to do, it can take from anywhere from the usual 40 hours to upwards of 60 or even beyond. The back of the case proclaiming the game has over 80 hours of gameplay may be true for you. And if you really want to get completion, there's thankfully a New Game Plus where you can spend this game's grade, a skill-based currency that's added or subtracted depending on how well you do in fights. Throughout the game it can be used to purchase EX gems or customizing materials, and after the final boss you get 1000 grade along with whatever grade you accumulated thus far to go towards effects and things you can carry over into the new game, so it definitely has some replay value there. Tales of Symphonia is an entry that is still fun to go through and only aged slightly in a few areas. It got overall good reviews and unlike the first two entries we got, sold quite well over here. It was the second best-selling GameCube title after Spider-Man 2 with over 100,000 copies for July 2004 sales, and believe it or not, it actually sold the most here in North America. For the GameCube version at least. It did come at a good time when RPGs were pretty starved on the GameCube, but due to less than expected sales of that version in Japan, the game was ported over to the PlayStation 2 over there with additional content. But including the PlayStation 2 re-release, Tales of Symphonia has sold over 1.5 million copies worldwide, so it's no surprise it's a popular title that got more mainstream attention over here, making it the first for myself and others. Because of that, I like to consider Tales of Symphonia to be the Final Fantasy VII of the Tales of games, at least in terms of the series entry making waves to the gaming masses. That legacy would go on as a sequel was released on the Wii in 2008, and this and Symphonia were remastered for the PlayStation 3 as Tales of Symphonia Chronicles in 2014. This version of Symphonia got upgraded to 720p and even includes English and Japanese voice options as well as the PlayStation 2 content since we never got that version, which this port is based off of, complete with being 30 frames per second instead of the GameCube's 60. And most recently the PlayStation 3 version was ported over onto Steam. Sheesh, tough crowd today. Okay, I won't pull a Jim Sterling here, but the Steam version, yeah, it's pretty pointless as they didn't really add or fix anything with this version, so it's not optimal by any means for being a port of a port of a port. Laziness aside, it is still a playable version, but only if you don't have a GameCube or PlayStation 3. I do want more accessibility for the series with PC versions, that's how I even got Tales of Symphonia for free as a pre-order bonus for Tales of Systeria, but Namco needs to step up their PC porting game to make them worthwhile. Otherwise, Tales of Symphonia is still pretty easy to get. GameCube copies are not too hard to find or that expensive, comparatively to Destiny and Eternia anyway, and if you don't mind the game being 30 frames per second and want the PlayStation 2 content, the Chronicles version on PS3 is an option too. You can download the game by itself on Steam and PlayStation 3, but you can get the Chronicles pack with the sequel for the same price as a better deal. Regardless of which version you played, Tales of Symphonia did really well, things considering, so the only way to go from here is up, right? Well, the next game on the retrospective is Tales of Legendia for the PlayStation 2. We're going from one of the most popular Tales games to one of the least popular. It should prove to be interesting to say the least. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm not lying when I said these parts would take a while, these are always an ordeal to make, but I hope it was worth the wait. If you haven't already, you can check out the previous game in the retrospective with Tales of Eternia, or maybe my review of Soul Calibur Legends. It has Lloyd in it, for some reason. For further updates, don't forget to subscribe and check out my Twitter. And then there's my Patreon if you want to support these videos even further. It's actually really close to meeting the first milestone, wink wink, nudge nudge. Obligatory promoting aside, thanks again for watching to the end, and I'll see you all in the next video.